Do we have to wait 40 years to reach retirement? It just seems like such a long time, and there's only so often that we can say, are we there yet? Before the phrase just loses all meaning. Thankfully, the answer is, of course not. But not everybody knows that. Or maybe they've heard of some of the other options out there, but they don't yet believe any of them would really work. Because if it is actually the case, if we don't actually have to wait and work for 40 to 50 years in order to reach retirement, then why do so many people do it? Well, in addition to the either not having heard of the other options or just not believing the other options out there will work, or just being one of the lucky few who really genuinely loves their jobs and wouldn't choose retirement even if it were an option for them, there are still a couple of reasons why some people would still choose the traditional path to retirement. As you can tell by the title, today we're going to be talking about the various paths to and forms of retirement, as well as their advantages, disadvantages, and some other things that you might want to consider before choosing your path to financial independence. Hey everyone, Daniel here, and welcome to Next Level Life, a channel where you can learn all about investing, debt, retirement, and many other financial topics besides, because let's face it, the schools aren't going to teach it for us. So if any of those topics sound interesting to you, or if you want to learn how to better handle your money and have more financial freedom, be sure to hit that subscribe button and the bell next to my name to be notified every time I upload a new video. And if you want to further support the growth of this channel, you can check out some of the links I've left down in the description below, which includes a 30-day free trial of Audible and 2 free audiobooks of your choice, as well as a list of some books that I would recommend checking out with your free trial. Or you can share this video with a friend and leave a comment down below letting me know what topics you'd like me to cover in future videos. Today I'm going to be covering 4 different types of retirement: coasting financial independence, mini retirements, traditional financial independence retired early, and of course, traditional retirement. I'm going to talk about what each of these types of retirement are, the potential advantages and disadvantages of each type, and who I think that they would be particularly ideal for. Let's get started. So traditional retirement is the one we're all familiar with, but it's also the one that all the other forms are compared against, so I probably should talk about that one first. If you choose to follow the traditional path to retirement, you find a career, work there for 40 to 50 years while saving enough money so that by the time you reach the age that the government says you should be retiring, you have enough money to live on. Now, of course, everyone's situation is different, but the general rule of thumb that a lot of people use for trying to figure out how much money they actually need to be able to retire is the 4% rule, which I've covered in previous videos. But the too long didn't watch version of it is you need roughly 25 times your annual expenses saved for retirement in order to have a reasonable chance of not running out of money. Some people say that nowadays the 4% rule doesn't actually hold up for various reasons, and as a result, they use the more cautious 3% rule, which pretty much works the same way as the 4% rule, except your goal is to have about 33 times your annual expenses saved for retirement. The primary advantages of this type of retirement is that you have as much time as possible to save that amount of money that you need, at least in comparison to the other paths, and in comparison to the other paths, your money doesn't have to last as long. As of the writing of this script, the full, or normal retirement age in the States anyway, is 67 years old, if you were born after 1967, which means that you could have anywhere from 40 to maybe even 50 years depending on when you start working in order to save up that 25 times your annual expenses, or 33 times if you're following the 3% rule. The disadvantage, or at least potential disadvantage, of using this path to retirement is ironically pretty much similar to the second advantage, and it's that your retirement is likely going to be shorter than any of the other paths, since you won't begin it until your 60s. This means that you'll have a little less time to do whatever it is you want to do when you're finally free from the need to have a 9-to-5 job. Now, this is obviously not going to be seen as a disadvantage by everybody because there are those lucky fews who legitimately enjoy their jobs, like I said. But for those of us who do have things we'd rather be doing than working our 9-to-5 job, it is something to consider. Another thing to consider, which may or may not be relevant to all of us, and unfortunately we won't know until we get there, is that it is possible that not many of our retirement years will be fully healthy if we don't retire until our late 60s. Obviously, we can't say this for sure since medical technology is always advancing and we're living longer than ever before, but there is always the possibility, depending on how we manage our own health and what happens to us in our lives, that there may not be too many of those post-age 67 years that are truly healthy for us to do what we want when we want. And you could make the same argument for any of the other paths, but when you're waiting till 67, it's a little more likely that your 70s are going to be a little bit less healthy than, say, your 40s or 50s. And as far as who I think this path would be particularly ideal for, Well, some may disagree, but to me it's a pretty short list. I think this particular path would be the ideal path for those who genuinely love their jobs and would still be doing that in retirement. And that's pretty much it. That doesn't mean it's a bad option for anyone else, I just think there are probably more ideal options out there. The next type of financial independence that I want to talk about is coasting financial independence. Now, coasting financial independence isn't retirement, at least immediately in the traditional sense, since you're still working for a fair portion of the process, possibly even as long as you are with traditional retirement. The difference here is that if you choose to pursue coasting financial independence, you're able to step down from a higher paying but probably more stressful or less enjoyable job to a lower paying but less stressful or more enjoyable job. The idea is that in the early stages of your career, or the most recent stages of your career, you save up a ton of cash and let it compound over the next 10, 20, 30, maybe even 40 years until it has grown to be enough that it's able to support you when you fully retire. Just as a hypothetical example to show you how this works in concept, take Jane, who works as an accountant and takes home $70,000 a year, which is not half bad, but she really hates her job. And she needs to get out of it for her own sanity, if nothing else. However, she did go to school for many years in order to get this financial opportunity, to make this kind of money, and she doesn't want to just give that up. So she does a lot of research and figures out how to minimize her expenses so that she can stash as much cash as humanly possible now, so that she can quit her current job and move into a different one that she'll enjoy more as soon as possible. She lives on a shoestring budget, takes advantage of various rent hacking techniques, pays off all her debts, and as a result is able to get her annual expenses all the way down to an incredible $18,000 a year. Not the most luxurious lifestyle, to be sure, but worth it for her so that she can get out of this job as fast as possible and not squander the opportunity that she gave herself at the same time. She figures that once she is out of her job, she would want to be able to live on around $2,500 a month in today's dollars once she reaches retirement, which, given what she has recently learned about making her money stretch, is not a bad lifestyle, especially if it is just for one person. However, obviously, $2,500 a month in today's dollars is not actually $2,500 a month when she retires. Say Jane is 27 now, and assuming that she was able to work a job she doesn't hate, she would have nothing against holding off full retirement until the normal age 67. If we assume a 3% rate of inflation, $2,500 a month, or $30,000 a year, is going to be a little under $98,000 a year in 40 years. Therefore, following that 4% rule, she would need to have at least $2.45 million, or thereabouts, saved by the time she's 67 in order to fund her current lifestyle. Given that Jane, on her current shoestring budget, is able to save about $4,333 a month at her current level of income, and if we assume an average 8% rate of return over the long haul before inflation, she would be able to switch jobs in roughly 29 months, or about 2.5 years. If we assume a 6% rate of return before inflation, then she would be able to switch jobs in a little over 5 years. Now, if Jane wanted to speed up this process even further, she could obviously get a part-time job just to increase her income a little, or better yet, find a way to generate an income outside of her job, possibly through some sort of side hustle that she could keep up after she switches jobs, and maybe even into full retirement. The mathematical effects on Jane's situation could be enormous if she managed to do that, and I've gone into more depth on why in my top 3 reasons you need a side hustle video. But even if she doesn't, 2.5 years or 5 years and some change is certainly a lot better for someone in her particular situation than 40 or 50 years would be. And that, of course, is the main advantage to this path to financial independence. It allows you to change careers fairly safely much earlier on in life than traditional retirement would, which obviously makes it particularly ideal for those who are not necessarily looking to retire in the traditional sense early, but just really don't like the career path that they found themselves on. The biggest potential disadvantage to this path is that you may either underestimate the amount of money you need in retirement or overestimate the rate of return you'll get on your money between now and when you start withdrawing it in retirement. So it may not be a bad idea to give yourself some sort of a buffer when you're estimating these numbers. Or again, find some way to generate an income without the need for a job, because it seriously does make a huge difference. The third path to retirement is FIRE, which stands for Financial Independence Retired Early. Within the FIRE community, there are two main schools of thought known as lean FIRE and fat FIRE. Lean FIRE is the path taken by those who focus primarily on keeping their expenses as low as possible. The aim for those who are attempting to achieve lean FIRE status is to have their retirement expenses add up to no more than $40,000 annually. They also usually follow the 4% rule, which means that their retirement nest egg is usually no more than $1 million. The advantages to this method, at least in comparison to the fat FIRE method, is that it comparatively is easier to achieve, simply because you don't have to save quite as much as you do with fat FIRE. The disadvantage to lean FIRE is of course that the lifestyle is not going to be quite as luxurious as it would have been had you achieved fat FIRE. Now don't get me wrong, $40,000 a year, especially for those who know how to stretch their money out and control their expenses, can still be a pretty darn good lifestyle, but it's not going to be the same as a six-figure lifestyle with that same knowledge. Fat FIRE, on the other hand, prioritizes achieving financial independence on at least an upper middle class lifestyle. The actual numbers involved will of course vary depending on your personal situation and where you live, but the idea is that you have a lifestyle that does not necessarily involve scrimping and saving in your day-to-day life after you retire. The advantages and disadvantages to this method are pretty much the opposite of lean FIRE. On the one hand, you usually don't get to retire quite as early as you would with lean FIRE, but on the other, your lifestyle is a little more luxurious, or maybe even a lot more luxurious depending on how far you take it. Whichever method you end up choosing, I think that this path to financial independence is pretty darn ideal for just about anybody. Even though the FIRE acronym technically stands for Financial Independence Retired Early, it doesn't necessarily mean you actually have to retire, or at least I don't think so. The concept that I take from this is the importance of saving, particularly early, and becoming financially independent so that you have the option to do whatever it is you want, whether that's changing jobs like in coasting financial independence, or retiring like many do, or continuing to work at a job that you enjoy without having to worry about the finances. Any of those routes are perfectly acceptable, but not all of them are super accessible without first having achieved some level of financial independence. The last form of retirement that I wish to talk about today is something that was introduced to me in the book The 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss, which I really recommend checking out if you haven't already. It's a great book. But in it, Ferriss talks about the concept of mini retirements, which are basically a form of sabbatical, I guess you could say, that you can take multiple times throughout your career without the need to actually be super wealthy. The idea behind it is you work for 6 months or a year or 2 years or whatever the case may be for you, and then you take a 1-month sabbatical or a 2-month sabbatical and do whatever it is you want during that time. And in those initial 6 months or a year or 2 years or whatever it ends up being, you're saving up for that next mini retirement. Now obviously this is probably going to be a little bit harder to achieve without some sort of remote working agreement, unless of course you work for yourself, but it is doable. And if you're interested in learning more, like I said, Tim Ferriss talks about remote working agreements and how to do this in his book. I'll leave a link in the description below. But the advantages to this particular form of retirement is that you get to experience it early and often. So you're able to recharge your batteries, as Tim puts it, and you don't have to give up on your ability to earn an income. The potential disadvantages to this is, firstly, if you don't or can't negotiate some sort of a remote working agreement, and you can't find a way to work for yourself, it is more difficult to achieve this form of retirement. The barrier to entry is possibly a little bit higher depending on how you look at it. There's also the potential disadvantage of not being able to save enough for full retirement down the line, which for most of us is still going to be a thing eventually, unless of course you get some sort of passive income coming in to cover your later retirement years. But this can usually be solved by just planning ahead. Since there's no hard and fast rule as to how often you need to take these mini retirements, if there is a year where you just don't make as much money as you expected, you can just hold off that next mini retirement for a little bit longer so that you can cover your long-term investments as you go along. The last thing I wanted to mention is while I did list these individually, there's no reason that you can't mix and match or even combine a few of them. For instance, many entrepreneurs will combine either mini retirements and FIRE, or mini retirements and coasting financial independence in order to give themselves a little bit of a break and recharge their batteries while continuing to grow their businesses. So don't be afraid to get creative with these, or even come up with an entirely new path yourself. Anyway, what did you guys think of these various paths or forms of financial independence and retirement? Are you pursuing any of them, or are you pursuing an entirely different path that I didn't cover? Let me know in the comments section below. But that'll do it for me today. Once again, if you enjoyed this this video, be sure to subscribe and hit that bell next to my name so you'll be notified of all my future uploads. I generally upload every single Monday, and if you have a friend that would be interested in this kind of content, be sure to share it with them. Let's really get this information out there and start our own financial revolution.